Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Aidan Mundy, and I am the chair of the Sustainable Communities panel. And I welcome you here to the first session back in the new year, and welcome all our audience as well in online and in person. Today we've got a cracking agenda. We've also got the next stage in our business plan. So I just want to, in addition to welcome everyone, just set a new goal for this year to try and finish the meeting within 2 hours. Many of you will know that this doesn't obviously happen sometimes, given the nature of our business. So we're all here to try and finish by around 9:30, having obviously performed sort of robust and fair scrutiny of the items before us, and remind the panel that questions, not speeches, and those presenting to be succinct. But no doubt from our illustrious lineup today that will be no issue at all. So I've got apologies for lateness from Councillor Geraldine Stanford, who will be joining us online. Is there any other, we're all fine for apologies. For declarations of interest, does anyone have any interest? I want to declare an interest as the proud recipient of an allotment for item 9. Getting my green fingers going, I will try to proceed item 9 in a fair and robust way. Can we just review our minutes of the previous meeting? Do we have any, do we have a seconder that are fair and robust? Yep. Daniel, thank you very much. Now our action log. I just want to draw attention just to the amber items. Does anyone have any questions or issues at all on those? So 1, 2, so Dan first.
Thank you, Chair. There was a bit of confusion about the blocks of flats requests that we made. It wasn't just to Clarion properties, this was to all genuine blocks of flats. It's quite a problem around the borough, both in private and in public blocks of flats. So if that could be amended to say that rather than just Clarion only.
Thank you very much. We'll speak with officers and no doubt we can amend that where possible. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that the roads and pavements resurfacing item has dropped off the action log, and I think we were going to follow up offline, Chair, to see where that had gone to, because there seemed to be an outstanding item in November.
Yeah, of course, no worries. I mean, I think on that item, officers said it was completed, so let's just get to the detail on that one. If there's nothing else, let's proceed to the next item on the agenda. So performance monitoring. Is there any particular issues or colleagues want to draw attention to in performance? Dan, go for it.
Yes, I was just wondering if you wanted the director to say a few things first, or if we can just crack on straight with questions.
Happy to crack. I think it'd be probably worth, given the length of our agenda, to crack on with questions and have officers come in on those, if that would be useful. So do you want to start off with us?
Yes, thank you. So on page 11, I'm looking at the waste management and cleansing various criterias. I was wondering if the director or one of the managers could comment on why the performance is so bad and why it's continuing to stay bad, and is it a particular type of properties? My experience is blocks of flats that are being missed, but do they have any explanation, or would they like to comment on that?
So that's 11 and 12 in terms of waste management. Is there any other comments or questions on waste management before we bring officers in? Anthony?
Thank you. I wanted to ask on page 11 about the residual waste per kilogram per household and what percentage of that is contaminated with food waste or materials that could be recycled.
That's a good question, given our last item at the end of last year about diversifying and moving to more food waste out of general waste. I give officers opportunity to come back on that, if I may. So 2 points there. One is about, I think, broader about service recovery, given COVID and the wider challenges there, and Anthony's point about diversification of the waste hierarchy.
Jerry, if I could perhaps ask John Bosley to pick those matters up. He's much closer to the issues, and I'm sure he'll be able to cover those points.
Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of performance and performance of the service, the current value reported in November being 104 missed collections per 100,000. Whilst moving toward our target is, we have seen as the service over the last 18 months, a improvement in this indicator. It's not ideal, but it is moving positively in the right direction. There have been two elements which we have suffered with as a service, both locally, regionally, and even nationally, which is COVID and COVID positive cases, which require isolation, as well as a fundamental national driver shortage across the piece. That has impacted on the deployment of frontline services and does contribute somewhat to less efficient services when you use agency staff to supplement regular staff in terms of that. And that may also be an indicator on why that hasn't moved as radically as we had wanted. In terms of street cleansing performance, that indicator is whilst not ideal, it is the reports being impacted is related to the previous. We've had to ensure that we do have the deployment of frontline services, and we've had to rationalize some of the staff used by Veolia in order to support those frontline services. Therefore, our rectification within our SLA of reported issues has dropped. Once again, that's not ideal, but in balance, we're prioritizing the frontline services to support those during these difficult times. In terms of the question about residual waste kilograms per household, I don't think that I don't think that food waste is a contributing factor, taking into place from the last meeting when we discussed the positive improvements in overall food waste tonnage that we've captured. We're in double digits in terms of the increase in tonnage in food waste, and that's one of our growth areas of Recyclits. Following the trend of increases in waste due to the change of workforce and the dynamics of home working, this fits in with that narrative effect in terms of that indicator being higher than what the target is, but that is fitting in with the increased waste arisings that we see locally, but also have been displayed regionally and nationally as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So one final round, we've got Nick and then Dan, and then we'll move on to the next item. Nick.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Very useful statistics about parks, and really good to see how many people rate them as good or very good. I've noticed that on CRP 119 SP 558, litter and cleansing standards are a little tiny bit below target. But I also noticed that SP 318, number of outdoor events in parks, is massively over target. Are the two things correlated?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of those two, I think there could be some contribution to that. One of the things I also think would contribute to the litter performance is twofold. One is the increase in the number of just general activity within our parks that we have seen, both once again locally and regionally and even nationally during this period. More people visit our parks and therefore use our parks. Interestingly enough, London spends around £15 million a year collecting litter and clearing litter from people visiting our parks. And that's an area of focus where we want to try to have users of our parks take their litter and rubbish home with them in order to preserve some of our budget. We also inspect parks probably more frequently than we have in the past. We have a wider team in the community who do more inspections in our parks. Therefore, the measure that the service provider will be measured against is probably a harder measure now, and that may be a correlation to some of the drop in performance is a harder measure. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think Dan had a final question on this.
Yes, thank you to your previous answer. I wanted to follow up on about the waste miscollections. Is it council policy for the last 6 months to a year to actively miss out blocks of flats preferentially over other types of waste collection? Because anecdotally what I'm hearing a lot in my email inbox is exactly that, where people are being missed for not just once, but maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row. So can you confirm whether that is active council policy?
Wasn't that also about an issue? Sorry, just to add on that, it was about presentation of waste. I think we talked about that last time as well. Was that correct? As an action? As in blocks of flats, the challenge of presenting waste. Okay. John, go for it.
Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of a policy, of course, it would not be a policy to miss blocks of flats for waste collection. They can be within the industry one of the harder elements to collect from. Knowing locations, knowing where bin storage locations are, access to bin storage locations, and once again using workforce that may be not educated on the round structure and where those individual locations are may contribute to less reliability or efficiency within the service. We, during our deployment of our resources daily, if there are shortcomings with it, there may be delays within the service in terms of those locations, but that's something that we don't have set as a policy. We do have a business continuity plan that underpins the service, where we do rationalize what collections will be prioritized, but the waste collection at flatted locations is not council policy to omit in the delivery of the frontline services.
Cool. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. So on to our next item of business, and it's item 6. So that's the call-in Score Streets and Aragon School. Nick is going to kick us off for 3 minutes, and then we've got Luke, who's on the online, and then officers will come back, and then we as a panel will vote on the matter. Nick, can I ask you to kick us off, please?
Thank you, Chair. If I may quickly just review the consultation, which began on the 19th September 2020 and concluded on the 31st of July 2021. Newsletters were delivered to 157 properties, 73 responses in total, 58 responses from within the newsletter postal area, 19 support, 39 object from within that area, a 67% opposed. 15 respondents from outside the newsletter area, postal area, of which 1 supports and 14 objects. In total, 73 responses, 44 object and 20 support, 73% object. However, I would like to highlight that of the 58 responses within the Aragon Road Zone, 39 had objections and 19 were in support. But in fact, 8 of the 19 that the council labelled as in support also state objections to the scheme. Chair, we've called this in based on proportionality and a presumption in favour of openness. We feel that this consultation was undemocratic. From the residents who actively responded to the consultation, the vast majority, using the council's own methodology, did not want the scheme to proceed. However, the council did not mention to residents in any of the literature that if they did not actively object, then they would be considered to not object to the scheme, therefore support. Furthermore, when reporting the results, the council does not distinguish between the people who actively supported the scheme and those who at terms did not object. Therefore, if there had been no responses in support, the consultation would have still gone ahead, as the council would have considered that only 28% of the people in the newsletter area actively opposed the scheme, even though it would not have had any written responses in support. This cannot be considered to be democratic. Furthermore, the consultation also listed residents who asked questions such as, am I allowed to drive past the school to my house? And response listing serious concerns with the operation of the school streets as being in support. This therefore calls into question the validity of the results that have been reported to the councillors, and that in itself should mean that the school street be relooked at. Surely, if when consulting 157 residents directly affected within the zone, the comments from the 58 households who responded needed to be addressed. Out of the 58 responses to the consultation expressed a clear view and requested adjustments to the scheme to make it fairer and more acceptable for the residents affected. These responses state that most of the issues are lack of access for friends and family, carers, taxis, etc., and carpooling schemes being unable to get an exemption if required. Other borough councils implementing school streets have made provisions for such needs for affected residents by allowing them to complete simple council website online forms on the day of an exemption if required, thus preventing unnecessary hassle. Chair, the consultation has uncovered a high level of misunderstanding in the report, as detailed in the final bullet point of 4.8. There appears to be a misunderstanding amongst some residents regarding the exemption process and the contravention. If the scheme becomes permanent, a newsletter detailing these points will be sent out to all residents. Surely that is too late. Chair, the ward council has also highlighted similar concerns by stating there should have been earlier consultation with residents to identify issues in advance. As I mentioned earlier, there was no statement stating that if you did not respond, that you would be considered in support of the scheme. This scheme needs to be paused before becoming permanent. Let's conduct a fuller consultation with the view to addressing the concerns of the residents. Surely it is better to take the residents along with the council's policies. This actually is an opportunity to show that Merton Council listens and an opportunity to work with the residents and find common ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So normally we can ask questions of someone who's spoken. So if you're prepared, that's fine. So again, about 3 or 4 minutes, starting with Dan. Does anyone else want to go in the first round? David and then Anthony. Dan.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Good presentation. My question to you is, do you feel this is the actions of a listening council?
I think there's an opportunity for the council to demonstrate that it listens. We have heard a lot in recent times that it is very much interested in just doing that. But what is highlighted here is the residents have shown their concern. They've asked for some flexibility. And I think this would be a great opportunity. So I think to answer your question is the opportunity exists tonight to demonstrate that it is a listening council, and hopefully that's the panel will take the opportunity.
David.
May not have the answers to these questions. I'm just keen to understand Aragon Road, actually. I mean, just in your experience, are you finding that you're getting lots of information from people saying it's very dangerous, that there are car accidents, that there's been, children affected by cars in the past? Was there anything in the documentation that alludes to there being issues? And of the 8 people, of the 19 who are seen as supporting the scheme, what kind of things were they saying that you felt weren't in support?
This is not, I think it's very important to note that a number of the residents are not against the scheme per se. What they would like to see is some flexibility to be brought in. At the moment, this does feel, like a lot of the council policies, a very heavy-handed approach. And that is what the 58 individuals and the residents that I have spoken to are really seeking. They want to see if their concerns can be addressed. And this, I go back to my first point, this is an opportunity for this council to be able to take a step back. Other councils are doing it. Other councils show flexibility with policy. They don't just say, right, this is it, one size fits all. So I would think this is a real opportunity for this panel to say to the Cabinet, let's take a step back, let's see if we can find common ground and put together a scheme that achieves the objectives while also has the support of the residents.
I think, sorry, David, just for time, can we bring Anthony in? And then no doubt we can have a follow-up after the next round with Luke, if that's all right. Anthony, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for that. I wanted to ask very quickly about proportionality. I think the person who completed the form for this call-in has misunderstood what proportionality is in this context, and that is whether the policy is essentially a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Now, unfortunately, you haven't really brought that in. I think there was some interesting opportunity there to bring in some of the reasoning behind and get some of the evidence from the officers on the reasoning behind it. You've talked solely about the consultation in both. So my question is first, why this school street when other school streets had very similar looking consultations? So I wonder what is different about this. And secondly, whether you actually have any comments on true proportionality, the sort of whether the measure goes beyond the mischief that it's trying to correct.
We reviewed all the results of the consultation, and we felt that this one in particular really stood out with regards to the consultation results and the objections. And we just felt that this one was actually, as I mentioned earlier, this is not about school streets per se. We felt that this particular school street and the response from the consultation was out of kilter compared to the others. In regard to the proportionality, in doing so, you're asking me about the actual scheme itself.
Yeah, so proportionality is about the weight and the effectiveness of the measures to remedy the problem, and you've not really spoken about that.
Well, I think the residents that I've spoken to have concerns about the length of the school streets. Now, if you look at other school streets, in particular the road I live in, Monkley Road, the one at Hillcross Primary School, that is a lot shorter and therefore doesn't impact as much. This particular school street is very, very long. Now, if you're at the end of the zone, then you're quite a way away from the school. Okay, so and the reason for the call-in, while we highlighted proportionality, is very much so based on the consultation, based on the opportunity we feel, given the responses from the residents, that there is an opportunity to take their comments and see if we can't find a common ground.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions. So over to Luke now. Luke, you've got 3 minutes. And if you wouldn't mind just beginning just introducing yourself as well.
Thank you, Chair, and for the panel for having me this evening. So I'm Luke Mccarthy. I'm the Chair of Merton Residents Transport Group. We're a group of about 150 local residents, some individuals and some representing a number of community groups around the borough. And included within the group are a number of specialists around sort of transport specialists, particularly around active travel. Which obviously the school streets is part of that policy. We've been around for a couple of years and initially set up specifically around the COVID emergency funding that was available to the council for the rollout of the school streets. I'm just going to say a few words about the benefits of school streets more generally, and then a few comments on the Aragon scheme in particular before a few concluding comments. I think the main thing to say around school streets generally is they solve, well, I've got sort of 5 key key challenges facing both Merton and the country and the world more generally. Firstly, around climate action or action to address climate change. And similarly around pollution and air safety. All of those things are positively impacted by the reduced number of car journeys, and obviously the safety one, particularly around fewer cars, resulting in sort of reduced idling and reduced risk of children being hit outside the school gates. And then the sort of 4th and 5th benefits of school streets are both around sort of health and well-being aspects, so encouraging pupils to exercise through walking to school or cycling or scooting to school. And then finally, the evidence shows that there's educational benefits as well, with studies reporting that pupils are calmer and more ready to learn if they're not subjected to arriving by car with the sort of traffic and stress that sometimes entails. In terms of Aragon specifically, the work that we did, almost exactly 2 years ago now, actually spring 2020, showed that there was a lot of complaints around sort of road danger, and that's certainly evident in some of the comments that I've seen from the consultation. from the London level data on school catchment areas, over 50% of pupils live within 800 metres of the school. It's got a very small catchment area, so it's actually very suitable for large numbers of pupils to walk to school, and also the propensity to cycle tool in terms of the wider pupils, where they're coming from. Again, very accessible by those living beyond that 800 metre, outside of that 800 metre zone. And I think a few specifics in terms of the responses to the consultation. My reading of the consultation responses was actually that a number of the ones that were marked as being against actually just showed that were really a kind of lack of understanding about the scheme and the fact that that residents were still able to access the properties, maybe a lack of kind of eligibility or understanding about how the exemptions process worked. We're certainly by no means an apologists for the council here, that there's definitely things could have been improved about the way the scheme was put in place and communicated to residents. And I think that is the biggest thing for me that came through on the consultation, is that actually an awful lot of them in theory could have been read as being supporters, actually, if they had sort of fully understood the schemes. And I think my final comments would just be around
Luke, sorry, you've had your allotted time, but I'm sure you can draw out some further time in your answer to some questions that I'm sure the panel are eagerly keen to ask you. So we've got David first. Is anyone else in the first round? Anthony? Anyone else? So David first.
Thank you, Luke, for your presentation. You mentioned a lot about children being driven to school, where I found all through the consultation there was nothing about these are all residents complaining and criticising the school street and actively objecting to it. What information do you have from the school and the children that are driven? What sort of things were they saying about the school street, out of interest?
Do you want to answer that one, or do you want to wait for Anthony's question?
I was going to say, do you want to do all the questions together, and then I'll pick out some key points? Yeah.
Okay, so he may not be able to answer that bit there, but let's go to Anthony next, and then we'll answer both together. Anthony.
Thank you, and thank you, Luke, for the presentation. Appreciating that you're not responsible for these decisions and you're not responsible for the implementation of this policy, but you may have some data on this. I want to return to the proportionality point. Is there any data on the air quality at the school before this was implemented and then taken during the consultation period? Similar with safety, that might be a bit more difficult because the numbers might be so low, but I wondered if there was anything on the actual issues that were being dealt with and whether the measures had been effective or not.
So I think you've got two questions there, Luke, one about the user experience, the local experience, but information from children and parents about driving to school and their experience there. And then the issue, as Anthony said, about data on safety and air quality. I think it's fair to put the question about when it was advertised and when it was implemented to officers, but you may have a comment on that as well.
Thanks both for the questions. I think in terms of the specific feedback from this school, it would be better to leave that to officers, but both about the feedback from parents and others, and also the specifics around the air quality monitoring. So I'll keep my comments at a kind of high level about kind of school streets in general, and I think that my main comment would be twofold. Firstly, that the evidence from a lot of other implementation of similar schemes, both around school streets and other schemes to encourage people into more active modes of transport, is that residents increasingly recognise the benefits and accept the need for the interventions once they've had a bit of time for the schemes to bed in and to get used to them. I think there's a lot of kind of resistance to change that comes with new schemes like this, and actually the evidence shows that there was a report just last week from a scheme in I think Kensington and Chelsea, or in Fulham, where where a scheme had been implemented and there was a lot of opposition in the early stages, and 12 months down the line that had significantly turned around. So I think my main comments would be at that sort of overall level, that there is sort of residents do become used to them, and once the schemes have been in place. I think one comment around the air quality question before maybe handing that over to officers around the specifics, and again picking up some of the comments that were made in some of the consultations around the displacement of this traffic. Again, the evidence shows that's not necessarily the case, that traffic just gets displaced, and that drivers, or in this case parents dropping their pupils off to their children off to school, just go on alternative roads. Actually, the evidence shows that with well-designed schemes, there's actually an overall reduction both within the restricted zones and beyond it, in total car usage. So it's not that traffic just gets displaced elsewhere. There is actually an overall net reduction in car journeys made. But the specifics around what that looks like for this scheme is definitely beyond the level of detail that I've got to bring. I think my final comment would just be that overall the council made a great commitment around the climate emergency a couple of years ago, and is to be commended, I think, in our view, for the ambition that's been shown around the school streets. And it would be a real shame if the council was to take a step back from the leadership that's been shown here, particularly as the climate emergency is such an increasing focus, across the borough, country, and beyond.
Luke, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to us this evening and answer questions from the panel. What I'd like to do now is ask officers to add their views and perhaps answer David's question about more procedural elements of advertising, the scheme and implementation, and then probably take a further round of questions to officers, and then we will decide on the matter.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the questions raised, I think we have been a listening council throughout all of this process. This started in 2020 as part of the COVID transport strategy, where we actually started off with a consultation about where we choose to put school streets and the LTNs and other measures. Aragon was shown up partly through that consultation process, but also as officers, we get complaints quite a lot about the school drop-off, school run at Aragon. Partly because it's actually quite a long street, quite narrow. There's not many junctions where people can turn around, and it's a popular school. So throughout the consultation, we've also edited and developed the exemptions policy as it's gone through. We haven't just waited to the end. So a lot of the comments and feedback we saw coming through from residents, and we're grateful for those comments, has helped build the exemption policy as it's gone. And Merton's got one of the most generous exemption policies compared to other councils in London for school streets. That's what's led to our officer recommendation to the cabinet member about still continuing with this scheme, albeit with edits. We have committed to reducing the operational hours should this proceed, but a lot of the resident feedback where it was against the scheme, if you like, although it said refuse or didn't support, a lot of the issues are actually covered by the exemption policy. So the scheme is not about trying not to affect residents, it's about limiting people driving to school. So residents in those roads still have access to their houses, they will get an exemption. Carers will get an exemption, businesses can get exemptions too. And we've had to develop, and to some extent, still got work to do on streamlining that process for the residents. So we still commit to doing that if it goes forward. In terms of proportionality as well, I mean, part of that is, as we've said in the report, it's not a vote, it's not a referendum. Yes, residents' views are key, but also we see the bigger picture as a traffic authority, where we want to improve the air quality, reduce road danger where we can, and also in balancing that with the fact that the exemption policy deals with most of the issues. We feel that it's reasonable to go forward with this one. It's also undergone a lot of consultation. I think it's about a year ago, we had a report to this panel setting out Merton's delivery of school streets, and it was welcome that we had a big ambition, and we're the leading authority in London for delivering them. I suppose the learning point for us, and listening to feedback from members and residents, it probably was quite a task to introduce 28 school streets in one go. That probably has limited our capacity to win hearts and minds in a time that we'd want to do it. And a lot of the timescales were dictated by the funding authorities at the time. So we still learn, we still will evolve, and we'll still work and listen with residents on evolving that exemption policy and making the scheme work for residents. But it still works for us from a traffic authority. And my final point before I go back for questions was the air quality point. There are air quality monitors there, and we get new digital ones around the borough, but air quality has been measured where the school streets are. However, the old style air quality monitors take a good year to get the data trend out of that. But I do question whether we need data for everything, because the point of school streets is you don't have cars at the school gates, you don't have that congestion, you don't have the vehicles, and you don't have the pollution. The fact that there's less cars present means air quality is better. So visually, you can see that there's an improvement there. So you may not always need the air quality data. The fact it's dispersed and that road danger's moved away from the school gate is still a bonus to us as a traffic authority. I'll pause here and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. And just before I ask the panel to put any questions, I wondered if any of our cabinet members have anything to add to Paul's remarks. Martin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Probably obviously just like to say a few words. As Paul McGarry said, we've had a very large rollout of school streets across the borough, 28, which is one of the highest numbers of any London borough. It has measurably changed the environment outside many schools in terms of making it safer for children, but also as well encourage them to walk, cycle and scoot to schemes. In terms of Aragon itself, we obviously have listened to the representations that have been made, and in terms of making the scheme permanent, we are reducing the hours of operation by 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon, which totals half an hour every day. In terms of the exemption scheme, we have had quite a flexible exemption scheme, and we have taken into account, obviously, many people have made representations. Clearly, all residents who live on the road are exempt, but clearly there are other reasons as well, valid reasons, where exemptions have been granted. I think we can look going forward, obviously, in terms of the process, in terms of applying for the exemption. But yeah, my experience is that the school streets are working, but clearly tweaks do need to be made, and we have made tweaks both at Aragon and at other schools in the borough in terms of the hours of operation. But it's something that even if the scheme is made permanent, we will continue to monitor their impact across the borough. It's my view that it's the right decision to implement a school street, and I hope that the scrutiny panel does not refer the decision back to myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Okay, so
Aidan, it's Geraldine. Can I?
I was just about to call you in, Geraldine, because I'm conscious that I didn't call you in before, and I'm so sorry. So do you want to kick us off first? And I believe Nick and then Dan. So Geraldine first.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to in response to what Paul was saying about the whole of the school streets. I mean, Figs was one of the earliest pilots, I believe, in this right at the beginning, and so I'm very au fait with how they've been working over the past couple of years. But what I've found out in my experience, that the schools and local residents are generally in favour of the principle of school streets, generally. But the problems that have been caused along the years has been how it's been implemented, caused mainly by how, dare I say the word, Ringo process things like the applications for exemption from schools and local residents, with many being fined unnecessarily because they haven't been able to connect with Ringo, partly as some are unable to access online reporting, etc. and leading to schools spending a hell of a lot of time having to administrate all the complaints that have been coming through where people have been fined unnecessarily because they can't get in touch with Ringo. Now, we were promised, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago now, I can't remember to be honest, but we were promised that parking were going to liaise with Ringo, promise that they were going to improve their system to make it easier to connect with them. But there doesn't seem to be much improvement to date. So has there been any progress with getting Ringo to make their reporting system more easier, to put it bluntly? Because I know, as I said, and I understand all the issues that you've raised with people, getting used to the system. But a lot of the complaints that have come through over the last couple of years haven't been to do with the actual, the actual principle of the scheme, the School Street scheme. It's been the way they've had difficulty in liaising with Ringo. So has there been any progress?
Thank you, Geraldine. Very good points. Nick, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, hopefully all 3 of them quite brief, with brief answers. First question, was this a consultation or a vote? The second question is, have there been any cases of actual hardship as a result of this scheme, or are any anticipated? The third question, is it the authority's point of view that either individual convenience or bureaucratic process should trump environmental needs? Thanks.
Thank you for 3 questions in one. Dan, and then we'll throw it open to officers.
Okay, thank you there. So after being faced with such a level of opposition, seemingly being determined to push this through no matter what the opposition amount is, can you tell residents what level of opposition would need to be achieved to actually prevent the council ignoring the views of residents? If it's 73% isn't enough, then what is enough of a percent?
Thank you, Dan. So I think we've got we've got many areas there. So overall, we've got a touch on Geraldine's point about Ringo. It's an area we've reviewed many times in the past about user and accessibility, given these new technologies becoming more and more prevalent and replacing other ways of payment. Nick's 3 points about consultation versus referendum, and probably more about cases of hardship, and the wider environmental benefits that the scheme brings. And I think Dan's point links into Nick's point 1, which is the level of threshold for consultation responses. Would it be, Paul, would you be best placed to answer all those? Thank you very much.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Thank you, Geraldine, for the comments. I recognise that as well. That the kind of inquiries I get in highways from people in the school streets, and actually echoed in the report for Aragon, the residents do see the reason for it. They understand why the council embarked on a trial to trial it. And I think that's what we have to learn here. It was a trial, it was an experiment. It will never be perfect from day one. Most of the comments we've had back is about Ringo, its usability or its convenience. We have been working with parking services. They're the one with the link to Ringo, and they have been trying to get improvements to make it easier for people to get exemptions on school streets via that system. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I'm happy to take that away and get a response from parking if they're not on the call tonight. But that's certainly something that's very live, and myself and the cabinet members in parking are monitoring. So we do see that Ringo could be improved just to make it more convenient for residents in the zones. On the other points, I mean, the report makes this clear. It was a consultation. The report says it's not a referendum. And actually, for a consultation, again, this went through more consultation, as all the school streets did, more than we would do for any highway scheme. Initially, it was a 6-month consultation. We extended that to just about a year in the end, because at the time it happened during COVID, schools were in, then they were out, then they were on, they were off. So we kept the consultation going for longer, so that people could experience the scheme and give us more of that qualitative feedback about what it's like to live with it. And we made that clear in the letters to residents as well. And again, I think residents did stick to that. There was initial views where people just didn't like school streets, and then there was that more detailed views coming in at the end about what it's like and what the issues are that we could help improve. So definitely was a consultation, and for me, it's about looking at the detailed responses and the lived experience for residents. It's not just a tick box exercise on how many people voted and didn't, but if members are interested in that, then we've got hundreds of school pupils in Aragon School benefiting from School Street, and councillors have highlighted tonight 39 people objected. And of those objections, they're not harmed or hindered in their daily lives in it, because the exemption process, it means all residents can get an exemption. So I think on balance, and given the public health and environmental benefits of the scheme, I stand by our recommendation to the councillors that this should proceed.
Thank you. Now, we've spent just over half an hour on this, and I'm conscious of our other items on the agenda, even though this is a very important bit of business. So what I'd like to do is draw this to a close and actually vote on the matter, because we are concluding. So we are going to be voting on. We are going to be voting whether we refer or not this item back to Cabinet. And then we've heard the case. David, we've heard the case. We've had the discussion. We've had half an hour. You've had an opportunity to speak. There's unfortunately call-ins that cannot have an infinite amount of time to vote to as much as we would like to. So what I'd like to do is, or if everyone has a chance, I'm afraid, then the reality is we won't be here until 11 o'clock. So we've I've heard you both. We've heard the evidence. Nick did a fantastic opening statement. We all heard his points of view. We heard officers' rebuttal. We've heard Nick's rebuttal. I think it's time to proceed. Fine. Give you 1 minute.
Yeah, there's not been a shred of evidence specifically for Aragon Road here. You've heard 3 presentations about school streets, which actually, as far as I know, Nick and Dan and others support within this borough. Specifically, with regard to this one, there's not a shred of evidence in terms of quality, in terms of accidents, in terms of people who are positively saying this is a good idea. It was up for a year, but there were still lots of complaints. So we kind of heard at the beginning that it was a good idea and people supported it, but all I've got is a lot of evidence to say that people didn't support it. They've had it for a year, so they understand it and they don't like it. And at no time has the council given me any evidence on air quality, on the number of accidents, on congestion. There's no evidence at all. I just heard broad, vague statements about school streets within the whole of London, in different boroughs even. So I can't see why. I mean, maybe a consultation to say, we will not listen to what you say. This is not a vote, this is not a referendum, because I guess when people fill in these consultations, that they think they're being listened to. And when it comes to 28 school streets, I love those school streets. I think Councillor Fairclough and I in our ward have been campaigning for School Street, where the catchment area is only 100 metres and there's 29 people drive there. But I've not seen anybody campaigning within Lower Morden for this School Street. I've not seen anybody campaigning from the school. I've not seen anybody campaign politically or as residents. And I've seen a consultation which says everything against the general views on this. So the reason I wanted to respond is to say we shouldn't just vote for this. We need to understand that there is no evidence to back this School Street. And that's why we should put it back to the cabinet member and say, what was your rigor? Why did you do this? Why did you ask for people's views when you've ignored them?
Thank you. Well, that's not a recommendation or a statement there. That's your view, and I understand that, and I think it's been addressed by the cabinet member and the questions, and again, more importantly, the paper, because the paper has the detail there, and this is a really difficult subject matter. It's very emotive. We all support, as you've said, school streets. It's a challenges and implementation. We've heard that residents have concerns. We've also heard the council is developing an iterative approach. These things are very challenging in these times, given the heightened concern of both road safety and also of the environment as well. And that's the wider part of our agenda tonight as well. So as much as I would like to extend more time, again, we do need to crack on. So what I'd like to do is draw this to a vote. Anthony, appreciate your points on this. But I'm afraid on this occasion we're going to have to disagree. So you've had Anthony, you've had a chance. Everyone's had a chance. Well, okay. Well, why don't we do that afterwards then? So what we're going to do now is draw this matter to a vote. So on the paper in front of us, we have there are two options, but there are three ways to vote. So option A is refer the decision back to the cabinet member for reconsideration, or decide not to refer the matter back to the cabinet member, in which case the decision shall take immediate effect. So I will refer to these as refer back and not refer back, and then abstain. Does everyone understand that? Okay. So to refer this decision back to cabinet member, can I get hands in favour of? 2. 2. Hands up to not refer this decision back to the cabinet member. Yep, 4. And hands up those abstaining. 1. So the decision has been made not to refer this decision back to the cabinet member, and therefore it will take immediate effect. Now, I'm also conscious that both the consultation, the comments here tonight, and some of the feedback we heard from David and no doubt others raised a number of important issues in terms of process and iteration. Anthony, you had your hand up. Is that something you want to comment on? Cool.
Whilst I didn't get a chance to ask the officers in a way that might have helped with this, I think some of the points raised by Councillor Dean are important, but I think answers probably could have been given. I have and I hope to make a recommendation from the panel on school streets more widely on some of the issues that are raised, and with your leave, I'd like to propose that in case anybody might be inclined to second it. So I'd like to propose that this panel recommends that Cabinet review its consultation processes where experimental traffic orders are used to implement school safety zones, to make clearer how the proposals are adapted in the light of consultation responses, and to include the measurement of air pollution and relevant traffic levels before the permanent decision is made. Point 2, to review signage to alert drivers about the zones. Point 3, to review information provided on the operation of the zones. And lastly, last point, to review on a regular basis the criteria and operation for school safety zone permits. So you can see my intention is to capture some of the matters that the panel has raised about the evidence base. I'm more than happy to take wording changes that make it more palatable to members of the panel. You can see what I'm trying to do. What I would have hoped to elicit was whether there'd been complaints about signage outside of the zones, because I've had residents complain about that, and also about the information on the operation of the zones, such as school term times. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a child who knows when school term times are. I don't know when school term times are. I have a 6-year-old. there's stuff that can be done. I'm happy to explain.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, again, as we know, bit of background for process, those watching online and in the back, because it's not been seconded immediately, we can talk about it and amend it and tweak it, et cetera, et cetera. So Nick had his hand up. I've got a point as well. Nick.
Chair, so thank you very much. What Anthony said is interesting, but it's also complex and quite long, and I'd like to actually have it written in front of me and actually have time to actually peruse it, work out what exactly it means, what the implications are. I think it'd be better if we actually brought that back to a subsequent meeting. That isn't temporizing. That is just wanting to make sure that what I'm voting for or against is thoroughly understood.
Thank you, Nick. I mean, I agree on your point. I agree on both your points, actually. Before I bring Dan in, what about if we simplify it to the panel requests in the next session of scrutiny? The officers provide a lessons learned document detailing opportunities to improve the process. We've heard some of the stuff that the cabinet members mentioned. We've heard some of the items from Nick as well. That way, it leaves it broad enough to include things, and no doubt, as you know, we have an opportunity to go back to officers and say, well, actually, we want it to look in these particular areas. If we're not happy with that, but that would be my steer. I'll give pause for thought and bring Dan in.
Well, I tend to, I think Councillor Fairclough has a fair point. We've seen in Wimbledon wards especially how the volume of complaints about school streets, especially the Cambridge Road one, there's been many issues. Councillor Jerding mentioned a few as well. We know there's been problems, and these are all fair points that should be considered. So I'm minded to go along with what Councillor Fairclough said on this one, but see if anybody else has any comments before I formally second.
Okay, so would you be willing to support a slightly tweaked amendment of your proposal to request that the officers bring back in the first meeting of the new session a lessons learnt on implementation of school streets?
Thank you, Chair. I would, but if Councillor Holden is minded to second mine, I'd prefer to vote on that first, and then I would be happy to second the subsequent proposal.
In that case, I'll second Councillor Fairclough's proposals.
Okay, so we'll go to a vote. So all those, so just for clarity, would you mind reading out what you are proposing, and then everyone knows exactly what they're agreeing or disagreeing with?
Sure, and I've already circulated it in writing, but I can circulate it again. That this panel recommends that Cabinet reviews the following 4 items. 1, its consultation processes where experimental traffic orders are used to implement school safety streets, to make clearer how proposals are adapted in the light of consultation responses, and to include the measurement of air pollution and relevant traffic levels before the permanent decision is made. 2, signage to alert drivers about the zones. 3, information provided on the operation of the zones. And 4, on a regular basis, the criteria and operation of the school safety zone permits.
So Dan, second that. All those in favour? All those against? So that is not carried. So we have a second recommendation. So yeah, so the second recommendation is that the panel requests officers produce at the first session of the new scrutiny term a lessons learned paper on the implementation of school streets. And Anthony is second. All those in favour? All those against? Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much, everyone in the audience as well. Appreciate it. So we move on to our next item, which is the business plan. Caroline, can I ask you to introduce this item, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is an update. I came to the scrutiny panel in November to give you an update on how we'd rolled forward the MTFS, set savings targets for each of the departments, and what we then have brought to Cabinet in December was the progress on delivering those savings targets. So what we have seen is looking at the adjustments, further adjustments for inflation. We've still not had the announcement of what the pay award is going to be for 21-22. We are still awaiting some of the outcome of the ballots for strike action. So it is likely that any pay award will not now be agreed until the next financial year, but it will be backdated for staff when it does come through. Clearly, utilities and the overall level of inflation is a concern, particularly for our contracts. So we are looking to review that and finalise that when we bring the final report to you. But we have actually included additional monies for inflation and utilities in the current budget so far. We have updated the capital programme and brought that forward to you. And there are particular interests, concerns, particularly for this panel, around TfL and LIP funding. We do not think that there will be any further allocations being announced, so we're sort of waiting to hear what the outcome of that will be and whether, as part of the final settlement, TfL will be able to raise a higher council tax than previously allowed for, subject to the referendum limit, to be able to sustain their funding going forward. But it does look like some of the schemes that were funded in the capital programme by the TfL will be severely diminished. We have, however, put significant bids in to make sure that we can, if there are resources available, make sure we get our fair share, but we're just waiting to hear what the overall level of funding is likely to be. You will see that in the December report, the gap was closed for 22-23 because we had assumed the 2% increase in council tax and allowed for a 1% increase in the adult social care precept. However, the increase for the adult social care precept does not have an impact on the bottom line. For closing the gap, those monies goes directly to adult social care for use for clients there and services being provided. We have updated the tax base, and that showed the impact of COVID, particularly on those who claim council tax support, had reduced, but was still not quite back to the levels that it had been before COVID did hit us. So compared to other boroughs in the South London Partnership, Merton did appear to be particularly harder hit employment-wise by COVID than our neighbouring boroughs there. Hot off the press, we took an update report to Cabinet last night, which showed some of the impact of the settlement. And just for highlight what some of those areas were, so there are some new additional grants, and that has been sort of quite fortuitous, and a new services grant. And it's been clear we're not going to get additional funding for COVID over the lifetime of the settlement, or the sort of the government's assumption over the 3-year scheme, that it is only a 1-year settlement, so that doesn't help with our forward planning particularly. And we are aware that there is going to still be the fair funding review, but we're waiting on the timescales as to whether that will come in 22-23 or will be sort of further delayed to 23-24. Clearly, the impact of travel on public transport in London it has been severely reduced, both with the capacity available by TfL and also then the numbers travelling generally. So that has had a benefit to us of a reduction in the cost of the Freedom Pass. So we have built that in. However, the biggest challenge that we have at the moment, and we are still awaiting to hear, is how we took part in safety valve discussions with the DfE to help with our DSG deficit. We got an email today saying that the Minister is still considering the proposals, and we should hear shortly. And unfortunately, because we do not know the nature of what support they will give us and over what time period, that can have a significant impact both on outturn for this year and also the MTFS going forward. We are likely to still have to put additional monies in, both from the revenue side and on the capital side, even if we are successful in getting safety valve funding. What we also have within the information pack, which members got, is the details of all the savings that were agreed by the December Cabinet. We've also given you the detail of those savings which were reported to be unachievable. And for the first time, rather than asking departments to swap out those savings that were unachievable and as their first point of call to come forward with new savings, we reversed them out. And there are details of those in the information pack here. We also have the draft equality impact assessments, and you'll see on page 29 of the information pack, of the 32 savings proposals that have draft equality assessments, 25 of them come up with an outcome of level 1, and 7 come with an outcome of level 2. So significantly reduced impact, but we still work to make sure that they are minimised as much as possible going forward. There are service plans within this information pack for each of the service areas and departments, and what has been agreed that it will be a light touch approach to the service plans for this year, because with the introduction and sign off of your Merton Cabinet yesterday, those service plans are likely to be refreshed along the new priorities and principles, and therefore it was felt that along with still the responses to COVID, and particularly with Omicron before Christmas, that there would be a light touch approach for those service plans at this stage. The detail of the savings proposals are set out on page 18 and 19 with the associated draft equality assessments later on. I'm sure Chris will be able to talk through the details of those, but I'm happy to take any questions on the overview of the budget at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Chris, do you want to add anything at this time, or any officers, any cabinet members?
Chair, happy to take any questions on the specific savings, which I know are in a separate pack. And if members are interested, the savings for E&R start at page 18 of that members' information pack. But happy to take questions on those individual savings, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've got almost everyone's hand up. I'm going to ask Geraldine first if she has any questions. Geraldine, do you have a question at all? Cool. I'll loop back to Geraldine if she does. So we had Nick, Anthony, and then David. Nick first, then David.
Sorry, I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay. Yeah.
No worries,
do it now.
Nick.
Okay. Sorry. I was just saying, I'm having great difficulty in actually reading the environment and regeneration bits from the business plan because of the tiny writing. So I haven't had a chance to get through it all thoroughly yet. So I'll see if there's anything that I can come up with later. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Geraldine. Sorry, Nick.
I'm having horror. Oh, here we go. Having horrors with my microphone. So, right, here we go. The first one, ENV 2022-2301. That's a big saving, £100,000. What exactly does it involve? The next one, Dean City Farm reduction in grant by 50%. That's not going to be popular. How are we going to do it? And have they got any alternative form of income? And I think we'll leave it there for the moment if we could, but I may come back on some others.
Thank you. And just to say, I plan to do at least 2 rounds on this as well. So thank you. So you will have hopefully a chance to get in. David.
I just wanted a top line answer first of all. And I think this is Caroline, because I'm not sure who the cabinet member is these days. They do change so often. But I'm interested in terms of three specific questions. Is what was the total expenditure for the full council for this year? So that's 21-22. Versus what is the total expenditure for next year that we're looking at? So that's 22-23. Specifically in environment and regeneration in Chris's department, what is the total figure this year versus what is the total figure next year? And then I have a much more tactical question, which is the Dean City Farm reduction. Has there been conversations between the cabinet member and Dean City Farm? Were there discussions beforehand about this very large reduction in their in the funds? So the two key questions, I think probably Caroline will need to answer.
Thank you. Anthony, then I'll summarise.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the savings not achieved, which are on page 75 of our agenda, which shows, I think, if I'm reading it correctly, that 87% of the target savings for 21 to 22 were not achieved by environment and regeneration. And I wondered if we had some detail on why that was and whether that showed potential problems for future savings or different savings. Specifically on Dean City Farm, I was also going to ask about the consultation with the farm, being that an email was sent by Dean City Farm today to people saying they haven't yet met with the council and they're going to meet with them next week. And I was going to highlight that it seemed odd to have these things in the papers before that consultation has taken place. And lastly, whether there was anything possibly in the capital programme for environmental regeneration on supporting step-free and improved accessibility at stations, which was the subject of a motion a couple of years ago, and the council committed to taking practical steps.
Thank you, Anthony. So to summarise, obviously got Nick's specific point on EMP 202, got a theme going about Dean City Farm, but particularly I'd be interested in also Anthony's latter point about, and Nick's point about what conversations have been had and what agreement, given this is the future year, and there appears to be detail about some support. It would be great to hear some more about. And then we've got David's particular points about the current spend versus future spend. And then Anthony's point on savings not achieved. And it'd be great just to hear a bit more on the process around that bit as well, because I'm interested as well. Maybe worth Caroline addressing your points first.
All right. Yes. So thank you, Chair. So total expenditure for last year was 549 million. Current estimated expenditure for 22-23 is 561 million, so an increase. For environment and regeneration, original gross expenditure was 68.5 million. Current draft expenditure is 69.8 million. With regards to the unachieved savings, so when we brought the cabinet paper to October meeting and then to the first round of scrutiny, we said as at month 4, because of the level of unachievements of savings across all the departments, we took the decision at that stage, because of the work that staff have been involved in dealing with the COVID response, that they weren't necessarily able to focus on delivering the savings. So we took the unprecedented step, and in some ways my colleagues will know it pained me to do that, of writing those savings out at this stage. However, we have made it clear that in proposals being brought forward, directors have given assurance that they are able to deliver on these savings, and we will still be doing the regular monitoring to achieve those. With the savings that were unachieved, that was as at month 4, there have been some changes to those numbers, and within the monitoring that comes forward, some slight adjustments, but we have still, with the agreement of chief officers, so they could focus on responding to COVID in their specific service areas, to not deliver on those savings. They could bring the savings that were currently deemed to be unachievable back as part of future proposals, but I don't think anyone has at this stage. And clearly a significant part of the E&R savings was the reversal of the emissions-based charging. With regards to the draft capital programme, so that will be coming again to the February Cabinet and to March Council, and it is my understanding that it is likely to be 2 potential schemes for step-free access included within that draft capital programme for your approval.
Thank you very much. I think the only bit we probably need some further detail on is Dean City Farm.
I'll leave that to Chris then. Thank you.
Yeah.
So happy to start with the first question around the first saving around waste services. And that's a saving that we're able to deliver because of some very good commissioning done by the South London Waste Partnership with Merton to re-procure the treatment for food waste and garden waste, which means that we've managed to deliver that service for less money. And that is delivered from next year. And there may be some further savings in future years, depending on how that the volumes and the way that contract delivers. But that's a consequence of that commissioning. On Dean City Farm, it is unfortunate that this matter is played out publicly. It's a shame, and I apologise that we haven't spoken to Dean City Farm before, but that was because this matter was a saving for 23-24 and not for the immediate year. And we are in conversation now with Dean City Farm in order to explore how we can mitigate the impact of this proposed saving. And we have in the past worked very carefully and closely with Dean City Farm in investing council capital funds in order to make Dean City Farm more sustainable. And that's been invested in photovoltaic cells on the roofs of their outbuildings in order to reduce their energy and running costs. So there are a number of avenues that we can explore with Dean City Farm to see how, either through their own resources and imagination or through some use of SIL funding in future years, not yet budgeted, we could support them to become more self-sustaining. And this proposal is a reduction of 50% in their grant. And I think over the past 10 years, they've had, I think, somewhere in the region of about £1 million of grant from the council and several £100,000 worth of capital funding in order to support their sustainability. In terms of the savings not achieved on page 75, Caroline's touched upon it. In addition to the emissions-based charging, the savings not achieved really are another raft of parking income that was anticipated this year. And I've said before at scrutiny meetings that our income is significantly down right across the piece in terms of E&R, not just parking income, but income in leisure, income in development control, income in a number of other areas, including regulatory services. And in parking, it's some £4 million down. And our assumptions in this proposal for savings is that that income returns as the economy recovers and as the restrictions around COVID are lifted. We see a fairly turbulent picture at the moment in terms of parking and motorist behaviour, but we anticipate that at some point that will return and that income will be regenerated in our car parks, on and off street, and so on. If that doesn't happen, and if there remains a gap, then that will be an issue for the council to address and for E&R to address. But that would, if you were to deal with it now, would immediately add some £4 million onto the gap for E&R, which at the last analysis was £7 million over the next 4 years. So at the moment, we're making that assumption based upon reasonable evidence about what's happening in terms of motorist behaviour. And that's the cause of that gap and unachieved saving during 21-22. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got a question, but I'll go at the end of this round. So we've got Dan, we've got Nick again. Geraldine, have you got a question?
No, nothing else, no.
No worries, and I'll go at the end. So Dan first.
Yes, thank you to Chris Lee for that answer. I want to come back on that. Parking income traditionally has been quite good in Merton in its many different guises. Is the announcements and suggestions coming out of City Hall from TfL and the Mayor about their proposed changes to traffic costs, parking costs, ULEZ to our costs, is that a concern for the council that any future revenue that can be gained from motorists will go into TfL coffers and not the council? And is that something that, as a corporate body, we're concerned by?
Good question. Nick?
Hey, works. Yeah, two things. First of all, thank you very much indeed, Chris, for your answer on the waste services. I I don't think we ever give ourselves quite enough kudos for these type of savings, which are, relatively speaking, painless, at least to us, and that's really good. As far as Dean City Farm is concerned, I really do understand. I do understand also that it's not this year coming up, the year after that. I might have an alternative 30,000 quid saving, which outside of this meeting, I'd like to discuss with the cabinet member and with John Bosley. Okay.
Is there that's good to hear. It's very cryptic. Is there a question at all or any additional?
No, that was a statement. That was a statement, a suggestion that rather than keep Green Space, Dean City Farm on the books at the moment, we could hold it back until we've looked at a couple of alternatives. Is that a useful suggestion?
I think it's extremely useful suggestion in anticipation of potential future recommendations at the end of this item. But I may call you back in to speak further or words to that effect. Thank you, Nick. So my question actually is for Chris, in a sense that, you know, you're thinking ahead to some of the challenges and opportunities, and you're already clearly working with an innovative team with the saving. We talked about waste and how we're changing how we're collecting it and digesting it and processing it, and given the sort of the long-term sort of trends of partnership working, where do you see the future opportunities to provide excellent services while dealing with the reality that the government is not giving us the enough funds to actually deliver the service you would have anticipated 10, 15 years ago when you were sort of thinking ahead about what you wanted to deliver in your role? That would be good to sort of hear some reflections on. So we've got Dan's point about the impact on TfL business-wise, Nick's slightly potential saving, but we'll hear about that probably no doubt in a bit, and my point about sort of wider reflections about opportunities and approaches to the work that you're doing.
Thanks for those questions. So on the question around TfL's proposals, I suppose the first thing I'd say is that I've got some sympathy for TfL because they're in a terrible position financially, and we know that that means that they can't give us any certainty around LIP funding, for example. We've only got commitment until middle of February, and they hope to strike a deal with government around future funding. And Caroline reported earlier in this meeting that the financial consequences mean that the use of their services, they've handed back some significant sums next year around Freedom Pass refunds to boroughs across London. And we know that their revenue has evaporated because of ridership across all of their services. So we'll wait and see what TfL propose in terms of the way in which they would want to treat any income that previously came to boroughs and their arrangements for their financial sustainability in the future. I've got a call with them in the middle of February, and we're still anticipating that we'll get some LIP funding for the things that we need to do in the borough, and we'll get some financial support from them. And I'm sure we'll have a healthy conversation over time about how we'll work together in order to ensure that we provide the transport services and the infrastructure across London. But I can see that their financial position is significantly affected for the foreseeable future. But I can't really anticipate any further than that in terms of what the impact might be. In terms of the way forward, the future really, in terms of where do we see savings being found, I think in simple terms, it will probably be more of what we've done so far in terms of probably three aspects. One, the use of IT and the greater digitalisation of our services and making it easier for customers to do things online so that we don't have to have a large number of staff or contractors providing middleware services in terms of dealing with those common processes. The second thing would be procuring better as and when contracts come up for renewal. And we see the benefit of working in partnership with other boroughs and procuring services to be able to deliver economies of scale and savings. And then the third would be around being more commercial and developing more services for sale, because some of our services that we offer, for example, via GLL and the leisure centres, generate significant sums compared to other local authorities nearby. And that commercial approach, that working in partnership and providing services that customers in Merton and visitors are prepared to pay for, has propped up the council's accounts for some time. And through the RSP as a good example, where we're working in partnership with 2 other boroughs, there's the potential to marry that alongside digitalisation and provide some of those services nationwide for other boroughs because of the economies of scale that we can provide, providing services online to customers, be they authorities or businesses or residents. So those 3 aspects really will be the way that we'll achieve some of our success, and just constantly looking for efficiencies. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And it's good to hear that, and especially how the sort of mindset and approach and continue to innovate and succeed and thrive and trying to get the best for our customers and users and residents. Does anyone else, any other cabinet member, want to chime in and speak or raise anything at all? Nope. Anyone else from the panel? No. Okay. Well, I mean, we've not got any further items on this, so I think we can move to the next item of business. So you want to make, okay. So why don't we do this then? To avoid what I sort of predict to be a lot of chopping and changing, if you could first draft it as a statement before we decide to do a quick round of seconding and voting. That way we all got clarity on what's been proposed, and then we can crack on. So I assume you've got something ready to hand.
All in my head, and I'm succinct. On the basis that the E&R budget this year is increasing by 1.8% to £69.8 million, I see no reason to cut Dean City Farm's budget next year. I think it should be taken out of the equation, and further consultation with members and Dean City Farm should take place, full stop.
Cool. So we've got a seconder then. So we're going to proceed to a vote. So all those in favour? All those against? Not voting? Okay, thank you very much. The motion's not carried. For a point of clarity as well, we're not talking about next year, we're talking about the next financial year, aren't we? Because, so that's 2 years' time, 2 calendar years' time. 2 calendar, yeah. Okay. So, Nick, you had your hand up.
Hopefully this is a helpful alternative suggestion. The panel suggests holding savings ENV 2002-2303 in anticipation of finding alternative savings, because there are, I believe, alternative savings that might be found. Just holding it for the moment. I mean, it's not a saving for next year, it's a saving for the year after.
Okay. So do we have any, can we get some guidance on that from Caroline or from Chris?
Certainly, Chair, if I can come in first, I suppose just to draw your attention. So as I mentioned, we took a report to Cabinet last night, and the gap, whilst we have no gap for 22-23, so we will be delivering a balanced budget, the gap for 23-24 is still £6.5 million. So whilst you may be swapping out a saving, we've still got a significant way to go on delivering a balanced budget for 23-24. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And the gap by 25-26 increases to a further 16.5 million. Thank you.
Chair, I'm thoroughly aware, I wouldn't argue with Caroline for a moment, but with what we have in front of us, we have one cut, savings, and I'm suggesting there might be another one, which might be an alternative or partial alternative.
Okay. It seems reasonable to look at this, given that it's not in the immediate financial year coming up. It is in 2 financial years' time. So could you just recite that again in the form that we could support?
I'll do my best. You know, I'm not brilliant at this, but panel suggests holding saving ENV 2022-2303 regarding Dean City Farm on the basis that it's a saving to be made in 2023-2024 in anticipation of a potential alternative saving or partial saving.
Okay, I second that. So why don't we go to, sorry, I didn't see hands, I'd second it, so we're going to proceed to a vote. So sorry, I didn't see a hand until after I seconded it. All those in favour? We're voting. All those in favour? All those against? All those against? David, all those against? All those abstaining? Yeah. I asked Nick to recite it. Thank you. I genuinely didn't. I was looking to Nick. Noted, and apologies. Okay, so are there any other items on this? Any other suggestions of changes, future savings? Okay, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to the next item of business. So we're going to hear from Elliot on housing environment and environmental health update. Elliot, would you mind giving a brief introduction to your paper, and then we'll ask some questions. And I just want to welcome you in your interim role, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. I don't intend to go through the paper line by line, but I think it is an opportunity to sort of talk about the work of the housing enforcement team, particularly that it's quite varied. It's not just limited to disrepair in the private sector. They also deal with filthy and verminous properties, some amount of hoarding, licensing of houses in multiple occupation. And it's fair to say the team worked very hard to achieve their outcomes. But one of the reasons I put the case studies in there, because I think it really illustrates the work of the team, and it sort of brings to life exactly what they do. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, though.
No worries, thank you. And given our previous questions of clarity in this area, we probably will have quite a few in-depth ones. So if you bear with us, or if you can't get the information because of the detail needed, just honestly just saying we can get that another time. So
thank you.
Anthony first, then I've got a question, and anyone else? Geraldine, do you have a question at all?
Not at the moment. I'm still not at the moment.
Okay. Anyone else? First round? No. So Anthony first.
There we go. Thank you for the report, Elliot. Most appreciated. Mine isn't a question as such as a request for the future. I've often been one of the councillors requesting more information on activity to support renters, so I appreciate these regular reports. But in paragraph 3, which is entitled on page 141, which is entitled Housing Enforcement Activity, I think actually it's a list of types of complaint raised rather than detail of enforcement activity. Obviously, there's lots of different types of enforcement activity, from informal to simple cautions, to prosecutions, to the various raising of hazards that the council might undertake. And I'd like to request that in future we're given that detail rather than the detail of the types of queries. For example, members stroke MP inquiries doesn't really tell us anything, but it'd be good to see what the council actually did in response to these things.
Okay, I mean, some of that is due to the council's computer system that records activity. You are quite right that what you see there is driven by service requests that are made to the housing enforcement team. And at present, there isn't a series of outcomes, but I can work with the team to see what other information we can get to get something that's a little bit more qualitative rather than quantitative.
Thank you, Eddie. I've got a question on a similar line of thought. So on page 141 with the table, it'd be good to just, for clarification, is that actual activity as in issues dealt with, completed, or addressed otherwise, or is it the inputs, the actual number of complaints coming in? And it'd be good to understand what the ratio of, if that is the case, if this is the output, as it were, good to understand the ratio of the input to output. And then be good to understand also, and linking actually back in the business plan. So on page, I'll just pull it out now. I think on page 231, it references the targets of, I think it's 100 enforcement, 100 enforcements made and 4 prosecutions of landlords. Bearing in mind, I appreciate things may change given your Merton. I'd be just grateful if you just clarify what that actually means in practice and actual detail behind that. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think what you're seeing there in the report is inputs. I think we can get information on the number of statutory notices served, but again, I'll need to speak to the team about getting that information out of the system.
Okay, what about the second part about targets in terms of, I think it was 100 to do 100 enforcements in a year, or not 100 inspections within a year, and 4 prosecutions?
Well, we've got data on the prosecutions. I think that's in the report as well, but it should have the number of, if it's inspections, we should be able to get that information. If it's actual statutory or formal notices served, we should be able to get that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got Nick. Anyone else want to come back? I may come back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elliot. This is a very good and very comprehensive report, actually. Just one question to ask. It's in 2.4, and I appreciate this refers to private sector. Under non-urgent housing disrepair, you've got overcrowding. Now, is that overcrowding where the landlord has deliberately overcrowded a property, or is it overcrowding caused by the tenants overcrowding in one way or another, either by increasing the size of their family or by inviting other family members to come and live, etc., etc., etc. It's something that we come across, as you know, in the housing association sector, where it is very, very different from repairs, and it'd be interesting to find out whether we treat it differently within the private sector. Cheers.
It is both parts, really. Under the Housing Act 2004, there's 29 different hazards that officers have to assess under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and overcrowding is one of the factors that they look at there. So that can be overcrowding either by what we would term as natural growth, or indeed by someone just moving into an overcrowded situation. It's also relevant for the licensing of houses in multiple occupation and things as well. So, in answer to your question, it is both of those factors. Certainly on the housing register, we do sort of pick out the overcrowding of people in social housing. They're in a particular band of their own. And there is also a law on statutory overcrowding under Part 10 of the Housing Act 1985, which does make a distinction between, if you like, immediate overcrowding and then overcrowding again that's caused by natural growth through families getting larger or getting through older age categories.
It's really helpful. Thank you very
much. Thank you. I've just got a follow up, and then Anthony's got a question. On 151 of the report, so that's in the appendices, it references about how the enforcement options for housing associations, and I'm obviously, we are fully aware of these sorts of states. We're fully aware of the news coverage, and we're fully aware of the recent ombudsman rulings. What would be grateful to hear your reflections on is, it says in the second paragraph that there, effectively action will be taken if there's a clear category 1 hazard. My reading of and looking at the pictures and inspecting myself is that there are category 1 hazards. It'd be good to understand how you implement this guidance in this situation, and if there's been any reflections or any plans to revisit this in light of the recent the revelations.
Okay, I mean, certainly the definition of a category 1 hazard comes under that housing health and safety rating system that I mentioned under the Housing Act 2004. So that's a technical question for housing enforcement officers that are trained in assessing this. So they look at each case on a case-by-case basis, based on the situation in front of them when they see it. And if there are issues, as per that policy, they would raise it with the housing association first. And in the majority of cases, obviously the housing association resolve that issue. There are no current plans to revisit the guidance as it's, or the policy as it stands. I think it's a couple of years old, that particular one, and that's a common part of a number of local authority policies relating to housing associations. That, of course, doesn't mean that it can't be revisited, but as it stands, that is the current policy.
Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. A question on the same point, really. I noticed the case study at para 4.4, which is essentially a serious issue in a housing association property, that the council was alerted to after the intervention of a solicitor. And I, rather like Councillor Mundy, I wondered about the policy on page 151, which is very much a hands-off approach to dealing with housing associations, and yet the council has clear legal responsibilities. And I just wondered if that, maybe could be revisited in the light of some of the appalling cases we've seen across Clarion properties across the last year, where clearly that sort of hands-off approach hasn't been successful. Indeed, we on this panel found out when asked whether the council had raised any issues with Clarion. The Clarion representatives indicated that that was not the case. So I wondered your thoughts on that. I appreciate it's maybe not something you can answer right now, but maybe it's feedback you could take from the panel.
Okay, I mean, certainly with regard to that particular case study, it is the case that we're driven by tenant reports made to the council. And in that particular case, the tenant had not reported it to the council. Our first point of contact was via a solicitor, who then raised the issues. And after that point, we got involved with that. I am interested in Clarion saying that they haven't had any contact from the council. That's something that I would, we do contact, you've described it as a hands-off approach. To my mind, we are contacting them about cases when they're raised to us, and there should be a record of that. So if that's a report from Clarion, that's something I'll need to raise with them direct, so to make sure that we have a record of that. But again, to summarise, that particular one wasn't one where we'd been involved or that there'd been an earlier inspection that we then referred to Clarion.
Thank you for that answer. I just want to come back also just about the case studies. I wonder, we've on separate issues, in talking about fly tipping, talking about other things, we always talk about using our comms team to best effect and trying to actually socialise these type of examples in order to elicit more of them, at least increase awareness of rights. I didn't know, is that an avenue open to you, or is that something that perhaps would be beneficial to maybe bring back at a future panel meeting? It would be good to hear sort of reflections on that.
Well, I do know certainly in terms of prosecution, then we do use cons for that. The cabinet member puts out a press release when those occur, and obviously the panel will be familiar with the fact that we've put a web page certainly relating to housing association tenants and their rights, and the tenants champion as well. But I think broadly said that, you know, additional comms that able to advertise the council services and raise awareness of what rights are, that clearly would be of benefit.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or comments before I close up on this? Cool. I mean,
yes, me, Aidan.
Geraldine, apologies. Yes, go for it.
Okay, it's really a query about the HMOs in particular. Many of which we've had problems for many years in Figs Marsh and Gravely over the years with this. We have and this is apart from any housing enforcement, we've had to look towards via the housing associations, because a lot of the problems are caused by private landlords or people applying or putting in an HMO without applying for a licence. They put in a planning application to extend their home for the family, and would you believe when they've done it, they move in a load of tenants instead. Private landlords also cause problems with the issue of antisocial behaviour, noise problems for nearby neighbours, and I know it's been really difficult over the past couple of years, obviously, because enforcement officers haven't been able to actually, they had to follow the restrictions and socially distance, so it's very difficult to investigate a property when you can't actually go into it. So that's held everything up. But one of the issues that we've been looking at for a couple of years now is the issue of the registration of private landlords, because that's an area where if all registered landlords had to register before they were allowed to take in tenants or have HMOs or whatever, then we would basically we would know what we were dealing with, because and we'd be able to either make sure that they follow the guidelines for running a home multiple occupancy, or they'd be struck off the register. We haven't. We've been trying, as I say, to get this scheme set up for a few years now, and haven't been able to make any progress. I know Martin's been working on it for years, trying to get it through. So, is there any possibility that this is likely to be put in place any time soon, please?
Okay, well, the council is currently looking at the evidential base for what they call selective or additional licensing as well, and that's, you know, it's a complex scheme. You can either do a number of wards or across the entire authority, but there has to show the evidence for it. Equally, above a certain number of wards, it requires the sign off from the Secretary of State. So, but where we're at this exact moment in time is we are looking at getting the data together to look at the evidential base across the borough for that. So that's an ongoing piece of work.
Thanks very much, Geraldine, and thanks, Elliot, for that good answer as well. So I'd like to move on to the next item. Before I do, I think it's really been helpful to understand the ins and outs of the team. It was really interesting to read a lot of the entry in the business plan as well. What I'd really like is to bring you back, if possible, on the 8th of March. And where possible, it'd be great to either have a visit if there's an inspection going on, so that we can see if it's appropriate, if we can see how things work, or at least it'd be great to get an idea of what category 1 looks like from our perspective. I mean, there are pictures online of what it means, but what do we see that in terms of our standard internally? And again, you know, the HMO picture as well. It'd be great to hear some more about that next time, if that's something we could do, Elliot and John. But yeah, thank you. Okay, well, John, go for it.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, by the way, around the data, we have just implemented a new database within the housing system the last year. We are working on the reports from the system. So we cannot provide all the reports yet, but we will go away and look to see what we can provide to make a fuller picture for reports in the future. But I mean, Elliot, we can troll through the systems, but that might be quite difficult. We would rather build the reports, so we will get them for you.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't want this to turn into an exercise that takes you away from your vital business as usual work. I mean, you guys need to, I've in my work hat on, I appreciate the challenge of implementing such a system and reporting and everything else that flows from that. But thank you very much for sharing that as well. Thank you. So on to our next item, allotments. Again, I remind you of my declaration. I think, John, do you want to lead off on this paper and just summarise what we've got so far?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick summary of the paper. Just want to impress the importance that allotments have provided both historically and currently within the borough, you know, from the war years, but most importantly, recently during the pandemic, they have been an oasis for the community in respect to playing as part of getting out and enjoying green exercise, as well as being a sanctuary for biodiversity and providing important green corridors across the borough. It's important to note within the report the heavy popularity of our allotments across the borough. Currently, the service is managing a waiting list of residents. The current figures are 209 on the waiting list, and they want to be and play and participate as part of the allotment movement. Allotments in the borough make up about 28 hectares of green space and provide over 1,400 individual plots for users. Of the 18 sites that we have in Merton, 5 of these locations are currently self-managed by local societies and committees. In terms of the waiting times, the service has prioritized the minimization of these waiting times over the last year. We've reduced the waiting list by 75%, and we've seen a reduction in the number of vacant plots within this period of 50%. This has resulted in over the last year of 163 new users. The benefits of allotments are numerous. They provide fresh and local produce, a healthy activity outlet for users. They contribute significantly to improved mental health and well-being, whilst also being a source of local pride and allowing users to contribute positively to their local environment. It's important that the service keeps pace with exploring areas of development and potential within our allotment sites. The areas of potential development include how sites will contribute to biodiversity, work to reduce reliance on potable water usage, waste reuse and recycling, and how is that undertaken within allotment sites, how sites are managed to enable participants to benefit from a form of management that is most beneficial to their local site. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? So we've got Dan, David, and I've got a question as well. So Dan, go for it.
Thank you, John, for that and for the report. Makes some good reading, and I'm glad we got this on the agenda the other year when it first came up as a topic. I just want to ask, have the volume of complaints and issues that were raised about 18 months ago, have they mostly gone away now? And a second question is, what level of service does the council provide to the self-managed compared to the Merton Council ones? Is it the same generally, or is it different?
Cool. And then I'll ask David.
Just really about when, first of all, I think it's an excellent service. And as this rightly says, this is not just about now, this is centuries old service, which is fantastic. But specifically, when I talk to committees of allotments, they feel that the elements that IDVD and council are involved with in terms of stripping back, greenery, etc., is probably a bit too aggressive. And they'd like a lot more left, especially on the external fences, etc. So it's a statement more than the question, but if that's something the officers can look at to do less around the allotments.
Thank you for that. I mean, so I've just started my allotment journey, as it were. So I'm still learning the ropes from a lot of expert hands there, and some have been there in these fields for many years. I mean, my question is basically, how do we join things up generally? So, for example, there's facilities in the borough about the social sort of hiring of tools, and then at the same time we've got children. And I know my ward colleague Joan Henry, who's big in the allotments in my ward, worked with local schools to give them a plot there to support their learning. I'm just thinking, how do we marry this all up so that we have a sort of golden thread through all these policies? And as I'm amazed to hear and very proud, David said this is an amazing thing, and sort of second that as well. So overall, it was reflecting those three. Dan's point about volume of complaints, it'd be good to hear a bit more about what those complaints are and level of service, managed versus self-managed. David's point about greenery and allowing nature to thrive, as it were, without management, and my point about this golden thread and how we weave things together.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. In terms of the volume of the complaints, I didn't do a deep dive analysis in respect to individual complaints with allotments. However, if memory serves me right, there were two elements to complaints some 18 months ago. One was the waiting list, which was significant, and it's an issue that we have tackled. Another was related to water charging. So that's within the financial element in the report. And what you will see is an increase in water charges per use. What transpired in terms of water charging is that we weren't keeping pace with the cost of water. We had, in essence, subsidizing the service with subsidizing water usage. We need to, especially during a climate emergency, we need to move away from the reliance on potable water for using that in allotments and in some ways overwatering. We need to provide more information and education on adaptive strategies, using mulching, using capturing water in different ways, and using gray waters for that activity, therefore reducing people's reliance on that cost. There were significant complaints associated with such. In terms of the level of self-managed versus what the council provides, that's a very interesting question, and that's something that that within the service that we're probing. What I've uncovered is that I don't think we have a consistent approach, that's something that I'm satisfied with, and I think we need to provide that consistency. So I'm working with the South London Legal Partnership in respect to setting up a better templated framework on how we can manage and govern in the self-managed allotment societies, how we can support them to have a more consistent approach to that, to how we have that relationship. Moving back to the Councillor Dean's question in respect to stripping of greeneries and I would assume in the curtilage or the boundaries of the sites, I agree, and in the sense that that's why kind of the last element to the paper was talking about the potential different levels of self-management within allotment sites, because the one thing that self-management, if done well, provides plot holders is that they can collectively work together to prioritize what's right for them. They can look at their allotment site from a local perspective, and they can choose the things that they want to do with their site that helps them perform best. It doesn't suit everybody though. There will be some allotment sites that don't have the robustness within their community to support that, and I acknowledge that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all process, but with those places that vocalize it, I would push them more towards self-management, which allows them that responsibility themselves to undertake that. In terms of how things, how we join things up better, the Internet of Things, for example, how do we promote that? How do we do work with Merton Food Bank? How do we potentially join up work with youth groups going to allotments and understanding that? I think those are all valuable elements that we need to develop going forward as part of the service. My new head of parks that will be starting in at the end of January, Mr. Andrew Kaufman, comes from that type of background and has a lot of work with communities. And I will definitely be putting this on his plate as he joins the authority to look at how we can develop those improvements. I can see going forward working with lots of individual groups, and it may be pulling that information together both electronically and also in terms of communication with the communities and groups to better join those things up. The one thing I would say is that we have an oversubscription of sites. Plots are very sought after, and releasing any plots for community use, we would need to make sure that we have a robust business case in place for that to ensure that that has sustainability to deliver longer term. And we have currently 51 vacant sites that we could look at, and a lot of those 51 vacant sites need a sizable amount of investment in them to bring them back up to a condition where they could sustain a allotment plot. And those may be ideal locations where we may look for grant funding in order to do that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think Nick had a point, and I'll close.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. I think John's spoken a great deal of sense there. The one thing, though, that really hasn't come up is that there isn't any money in allotments. Allotments, you know, certainly when I was cabinet member, allotments were managed as and when there was time, and you know, however much we'd like to see greater homogeneity between allotments, the very fact that there is no money means that they are all very, very different to each other. In fact, it's part of their charm. The difficulty, Chair, with what you were suggesting, and it's a lovely suggestion, I like it, is that kind of level of organisation actually means taking officers out of other duties to do it. And of course, as we know, and I'm sure that John would back me up on this in using much better parlance than me, officer parlance, that we just don't have the kind of officer capacity to actually achieve that at the moment. It could be done, of course, by councillors, if you're suggesting it, you know, might be an idea, but I don't think it's something where we could rely upon the officers to do it for us. Cheers.
So thank you, Nick. And of course, I mean, the reality is, as John was inferring to on page 168, especially we're talking about level 3 option, is that this needs to be community led, but council facilitated and councillor facilitated. So, you know, information sharing, reducing variation, you know, as a new plot holder, be great to have got some information just on the basics. and things like this. And that's where there is a duty for the council to reduce variation. But I would agree with you that, you know, as a community resource, and has been for years gone by, plot holders need to take the lead, but can be facilitated with some great organisation and spirit from both officers, councillors, and other community organisations. Is there anything further, John, Chris, you want to add on this before we close?
If I could add the money side, and I think Councillor Draper touches on a very sound point. Within the financial element of the report and the table, you can see that we receive in rental fees £60,000 per annum in respect to that. Water charges are cost neutral. It's just a full cost recovery model in respect to that. So there isn't a lot of money in allotments. I would also note that locally we have a very low rate for allotments. Some neighboring boroughs charge 3 to 5 times more per plot than we charge in Merton. So we have a very historically low rate for allotments. That gives us an advantage in some ways, where we can look at alternative models and working with other groups to help deliver that, and the service governs that relationship, once again, where appropriate. And I think that gives us plenty of scope to strategically look on how we deliver allotments going forward. And because of their importance, that's something that we will ensure we prioritize within the service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No doubt we'll look forward to hearing more when the new head of parks start their role and in the new scrutiny season. So if I can move us on to our last item, the work programme. Are there any comments or any additions to that we've not already discussed in or outside this panel? No? Brilliant. Okay, well, we just went over 2 hours, so thank you very much for everyone for being short in questions and statements. Thank you very much for watching at home, and thank you for everyone who came before us today, and officers as well. Take care.